here to interview Subrata Mitra. It's an extreme pleasure and privilege to interview you, Subrata, and thank you for coming on board. Think about any successful startup of India, and chances are it's part of Accel's India portfolio. Talk about Flipkart, Myntra, Freshdesk, BookMyShow. They all are part of Accel India portfolio. Today, we are here with Subrata to learn from him what are his experiences while co-building some of these successful companies. Subrata, my first question to you is, what do you exactly look for when you invest into a startup? What struck you about a Sachin Bansal of Flipkart or a Mukesh Bansal of Myntra?
So first of all, some disclaimers. Right? Even over the 10-year period, I have been fortunate to work with maybe about a handful of startups so far. So maybe about 15 companies. So whatever I tell you today is limited to that experience. So while we have looked at a bunch of other companies and not invested in them, and there are other partners at Accel who have invested in other companies. Our total today of active companies is just north of 50, but it's still a limited experience. I would so therefore urge you to take whatever I tell you today with a pinch of salt. So it's just sort of one point, and when you connect a lot of data points, that's when you should start making inferences, not just what I tell you. That being said, to go back to your question, Shrija, I think we do obviously investments such as BookMyShow, which is rare, but it's also very different. It is the company was already profitable when we invested in them, and the metrics were very, very different, right? So they had a running business which in India happened to be the leaders, market leaders in this whole movie ticketing space. Almost 80-85% of online ticketing was already going through their systems when we actually invested in them. And therefore, the decision making there is quite different from when we, let's say, invested in any of the other companies that you talked about, be it Flipkart, be it Myntra, be it Freshdesk or Mu Sigma or so forth. So for that set, the early stage set, at least my filters have been largely to be determined by the quality of the team. And by that, what I mean is obviously, people who come with lot of belief in what they're trying to do. In Sachin and Binny Bansal's case, their belief was that the quality of service that an Indian e-commerce site should deliver to their customers should be, better than anybody else worldwide. Forget about the rest of India. And that's where we started, and every time we deliver a packet, we try to be true to that initial thought process. But that, of course, is just sort of one point, and that's just an example. But everything that they proved to us, and in that case, we actually had a little bit of time to engage with them before we had to make this decision of investment. What we found out very quickly were not only that they were tremendously passionate people about what they were talking about, and obviously they had given up Amazon jobs, but more importantly, they would come back to our office every other day. Even though we haven't actually called them for a meeting, they would actually come by and tell us that, oh, today, I signed another distributor, and the guy sits in this little office in North Delhi and works for, and we were talking about books at that time, a bunch of people that we really want to get an engagement with. Or they would come back and say, today we figured out how to do the packaging slightly differently so that it is actually, more green in some sense, right? So it was...
Was it like they constantly urged you that you invest in me?
And they were never saying invest in me, right? And the beauty of it was I knew why they were coming there and they knew why they were coming there. But the engagement was always with respect to, here is the next hurdle that we have crossed. And look at this, that while I believe that my goal is so far, I'm showing you all these mini steps that I can cover like a true marathon runner very, very, predictably, right? So at some point we said, and our biggest challenge, of course, with investing in Flipkart was we knew it had to raise a lot of money. And I had no clue it had to raise the kind of money that we have raised today. But I was expecting more in the 50 to 100 million kind of range. And we were a $60 million fund. So how does a $60 million fund play in a company which might need to raise $100 million? So part of the time that it took us to get to the decision was because we didn't know that we could, take this company reasonably forward, that somebody else will come and pick it up.
How critical is the business model? Like Myntra began with customization of mugs, and now they're into e-commerce. And Flipkart, when I sort of interviewed Sachin, was telling me that his initial idea was to open a shopping comparison website. But then he sort of found out that there are not enough shopping websites in India to begin with, credible e-commerce websites. And then they thought of, reinventing the entire wheel of e-commerce in India and perhaps starting their own e-commerce website. When we talk to entrepreneurs, and they say that they keep pivoting. As long as the team is good, you can keep pivoting. So how critical really is the business model?
So again, it depends on the stage of the company. We have largely looked at the founding teams as the number one requirement, and maybe the business model as sort of the second requirement. And like you said, Myntra is the classical example of we are, depending on how you look at it, in our third or fourth business model today, and that's the one that is starting to scale. And when we started for the first year and a half, we had no clue that this is where we should end up. All the way we were debating that what are the other things we should do, because the markets that we were in looked relatively smaller and niche. So I would still say that having the right team which can actually look at all these business models and put up a fairly, unbiased analysis of it, saying that, just because it worked in the US, it may or may not work in India, which is where, the Myntra thing didn't actually work. We were looking at Spreadshirts and other models in the West that in their markets have scaled reasonably, Zazzle and Spreadshirts and things like that. But in India, it turned out to be pretty hard. There are companies trying now, which is almost 6, 7 years after Myntra. I still don't feel that comfortable with those business models. But to go back to your question, I think that for us, it was always critical that the team be so good that they can make these weighted decisions. And of course, India is also in a situation where you don't need to get it right first time, right? I mean, there are enough opportunities where if the team is good and you can kind of maneuver a little bit and find the right thing in attempt 2 or 3, because it's such a nascent market still, you can still have an opportunity to create something big.
I think you talk about how Sachin and Binny used to come to your office every day and tell you about their developments. Now, what about
they stopped coming to our office after we funded them. Now I have to go to their offices.
They become too big now. Yeah. So, what was the initial outcome? Did you actually imagine that Flipkart would really become so big when you invested in them?
No way. I mean, I still remember our first around the time that we were signing up, that conversation with Sachin and Binny. I was telling him, let's assume you'll get to 100 million exit, right? Are you happy? Because this round and you'll need 20 million more to get to 100 million exit. Our calculation, whatever we were smoking at that time. And I think to raise that next 20 million, you'll probably have to give 40% of your company, and then you're giving some to us. So are you okay to have like 15% each of 100 million business? I said, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah. Talking about Flipkart and Myntra, both these companies, if you were to sort of tell me how do you look at both these companies in the same space? There were rumors in the press about Flipkart and Myntra merger. Potentially, what do you think would have that created? Would you think that was a more simpler option for Myntra rather than trying to build out own by itself?
So if you were to draw the global parallels, Flipkart is more like Amazon, and Myntra, at least we want to model it after this company called ASOS, which, if you look at them, has been tremendously successful actually. And that's sort of the DNA of the teams as well. If you look at Myntra, they want to excel in fashion, not only in fashion, but potentially in women's fashion. And within that, build a bunch of what we call private labels, which are their own home brands, which eventually could have their own .com, so to say. Sure. Right? So if Levi's is a brand that we all recognize today, can Myntra completely online create 2 or 3 such brands which will be pretty well known, let's say 5 years down the road, and people relate to that. And we are actually in the process of building 3 of these. One for men, young men, like most of the people in this audience, jeans and shirts and things like that. One for fashionable women, younger women, and one for Indian dresses for women. Right? So there are these 3 very concerted effort already started and fairly farther along, I would say, within Myntra. I mean, while Flipkart might want to do that, but that's probably not where they would, really focus a lot of their energies. They should start doing or continue to do everything that is horizontal. So they're really good at cell phones. They need to be really good at, laptops and accessories and everything else in the electronics category, and then maybe do more of, the white shirts and the ties and the standard products is my thought process. Again, I'm sure Sachin and Vinny differs from me.
Absolutely. Tell us about 3 or 4 areas where you really worked with Sachin or Flipkart, maybe, at the board level. In terms of value creation, 3 or 4 areas where you sort of really led the trajectory of the company in a particular way.
And here I would say the entire board, let's not limit to myself, we have very established other board members on the company, including people from Tiger Global and Rajesh Mago, who is now the CEO of Make My Trip. So I would say our concerted effort is to potentially ask the right questions to people like Sachin and Vinny and their executive team, and let them come back and tell us which of these they want to pursue. And I would say the very first ones were setting up company metrics, right? So when we started, when we first got in, we were doing like 100 books a day, but we very rapidly wanted to expand into other categories like mobiles and stuff like that. Need to be focused on before we choose our categories. That became a big several month discussion, if I remember, at the board level. The other thing that I think completely Sachin and Vinny's call. We got very scared when they came back and told us that they wanted to try out cash on delivery. And today, looking back at it, the company wouldn't have been what we are without launching that at that time. So clearly, at least I know that I was a little circumspect. Not everybody on the board was enough circumspect at that time so that the company made the right decision. But those were at least 2 that I remember, and then were many more. I mean, every board meeting that we have, we definitely try to discuss strategic issues, that what kinds of team members do we need to bring in, what should the org structure look like. Today we are doing close to 100,000 orders a day as opposed to 100 orders a day. Where is the scale and the supply chain side going to come from? Do we need to build more warehouses? So each of these are, I think, very, very involved decisions.
No, but there have been some missteps also. What about flight?
Yeah, I mean, you can call flight a misstep, but I would say that we are still kind of retracted it, not to say that we'll not launch it ever. So I think the timing of flight was a mistake. I wouldn't say flight was a mistake. So a lot of these in a startup is about trying small experiments. And in this case, we were big enough that the small experiment was worth, several $1 million, but it didn't hurt us. So it was a small enough experiment that we tried for more than a year. And we had an initial ramp, so we all got very excited, but it tapered off, and then we tried a few things, it didn't work. So at some point we said, given that we have 13 other things which are burning and potentially larger, including the launch of PayZippy, should we now defocus this for a while and let, it's always a bandwidth issue, right? So should we just go focus on a few other things? So I would be a little bit different in terming it as a misstep. I would just say that the timing didn't work out right. It's like any other experiment that a startup needs to run.
It was a great service. It was excellent, the entire flight experience. So
I wish everybody around India wants to buy music.
So you're saying that if an entrepreneur should be like nimble-footed, right? You need to set out your priorities, what to do when. That's been fun learning.
Absolutely. I mean, I have fortunately been able to run 2 startups in my time, one not successful at all, the other reasonably successful. And I would say the difference between the 2 was actually a market issue. I mean, we had good teams on both. In one case, the market sort of aligned with us, and we sort of were able to catch that inflection relatively quickly. And in the other case, we were little ahead of the market, and then the little ahead became much more ahead and much more ahead. So, but the good thing was we caught that, and we flipped very, very quickly. We decided to sell the company, even though I as a founder didn't make money, some of the investors didn't make money. So we actually took that call, and it freed up everybody to do the another one and try another go at it.
If you were to sort of tell me 2 key lessons you have learned from each of these 3 companies, starting from Flipkart, I think a lot of entrepreneurs learn from investors. It's a very partnership kind of arrangement that one gets into, an entrepreneur-investor. But as an investor, what have you learned from Sachin and Binny at Flipkart?
So I'll actually start with Mu Sigma because
Sure.
it was almost the first time we were being investors. So I don't think we even knew what it meant to be an investor when we were working with Mu Sigma. And I think because of that, our association was more as a co-founder rather than an investor. And the two lessons we learned, and there are lots more. I think I was actually amazed with Dheeraj's sales abilities. And this is a guy who at that time when we first started working with him was like 29 years old. But he had taken, in my opinion, consultative selling to a completely different level. So he would never walk away from a customer without getting something. At least get a next meeting. And he would always tell me that, and I am a techie, if you don't know. I have been a VP of engineering and a founder that way, but I have never been on the sales side. But this guy just amazed me. I mean, he will walk into a meeting and he'll come back and say, here are the positives, right? So I need to go back in there in a month's time and I'm sure I can, get this to happen. And in the end, only 10% of the things would happen. So it's not like everything turned out to be positive, but he would almost make us believe that every time he walked into something, a result is going to come in a positive way. So just be, die hard positive about what you're trying to do. And if you are not, that means that you're either in the wrong business, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, or you're doing the wrong startup, right? So there is something wrong out there. So that was a big lesson I learned from, not that I didn't know it before, but he kind of underlined it over and over again. So I keep saying that when I get a chance, right? And Sachin and Binny are sort of, the epitome of execution. I would say that in India, if somebody can think big and make it happen, these are the guys, right? So the way they approach problems, and maybe, two of them have completely two different DNAs. So Sachin is this emotional, big thinking, let's go do it kind of guy. And then Binny will be the guy saying, I know we need to do it, but let's figure out how, right? So, and that's why I think that combination works so well. Because in the end, when we invested in Flipkart, there were like other companies trying to do that, right? The fact that they were so meticulous in execution is probably, more than, in my mind, 50% of the reason that they actually got to where they got to.
Interesting. What happens, when a company like sort of Flipkart went through a lot of negative PR, a couple of years back, especially with this entire FDI restructuring and, things like that. As investors, what was your, advice or caution to the entrepreneur? How do you sort of maneuver that? What did you tell them?
So what I try to tell them specifically about PR is every PR is good PR. You just need to live beyond that, right? So, and that's true for, if somebody knows your name, it cannot hurt. You need to massage the message in such a way that it turns out to look positive. And the fact that, people talked about Flipkart and we are still there as sort of the largest potential company to ever come out of India, I think those guys should go back and retrospect what they were talking about. It didn't hurt us, for sure.
Yeah, and then there's also a view in e-commerce about topi investing. There's a very famous peer contrarian investor in your community who likes to call it topi investing because he feels that e-commerce fundamentally cannot really make money in terms of the kind of valuations people are raising money at. It's crazy. So it's like one VC is putting his topi on another.
Oh, okay.
Do you essentially subscribe to that view? And what essentially makes Flipkart to raise money at such valuations? Do you think is justified?
Again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So I may not like what you like, and I might be willing to, pay a lot more money for certain things that you won't be. So, but that aside, there are some standard metrics now that Flipkart is whatever size it is, that gets applied, and it's true for Myntra and a lot of other companies like Snapdeal as well, that with respect to, there are really like 5 or 6 large parameters that we try to, look at the board level, right? So there is this gross merchandising value, what is called GMV, and then the net merchandising value, which is you take out your returns and a few other things like that, and then there is what is called a gross margin, and then there is a net margin, and then there is a contribution margin. I'll not go into the details of whatever all of that means. And then contribution margin means if you sell a bottle of water, in the end, how much contribution does that make, that one bottle of water, to your bottom line? And usually it will be, some percentage point
In the case of Flipkart and Myntra and all of these e-commerce companies, it's a small positive integer, right? And that's true for even Amazon, for most of the products that they sell. So from that perspective, we are not whacked out, right? And then what happens is the negative comes because you add up what is called G&A, which is basically your engineering team, your your sales and marketing and your business development and all of that.
Not in technicalities, what is Flipkart exactly trying to build?
What is it trying to build? It is trying to build a hugely successful, large e-commerce and marketplace brand out of India.
And Myntra?
Myntra will be, like I said, ASOS, which is very, very focused on men's and women's fashion, potentially have more women shoppers than men, a mixture of new unique designs as well as new unique content as to why some of these contents, some of these products are unique, and therefore be able to engage the customer into a buying process.
Okay,
right?
We talked a lot of positives of all these companies.
Yeah.
Tell me one thing that sort of keeps you awake in the night, or should keep the founders awake, Sachin awake on Flipkart.
I mean, and I don't think it keeps Sachin awake at night because he thinks of these things very differently. But what keeps me awake at night is, you look at the number of people who have ever shopped online, in a physical goods e-commerce across the board, right? It's a number like 20 million. And that, the average basket size in India, I mean, we were doing the study the other day, is like a sixth of China. Right? So that multiplier of 20 million with the average basket size is still a very, very small number. And our estimate was last year, the total market size of e-commerce, physical goods, was about $2 billion. Now, if that market does not get to about $20 billion, which is not a big market, US is 250, China is about to cross 250 this year. There are other, Russia is ahead of us. Brazil is ahead of us. So 20 is not a large number, but if it doesn't get to there, we'll not get critical mass, and then maybe all of these companies will sort of start tapering at some point. But if it starts getting to 10 and beyond, I think, Myntra, Flipkart, Snapdeal, Amazon, all of these could succeed.
Okay, now it's time for some trivia with Subrata Mitra.
Okay.
Okay, I'm naming 5 portfolio companies of Accel Partners.
Yeah.
And you're going to rate them on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of return expectations that you have.
Wow.
Okay, Mu Sigma, Fresh Desk, Power to SME, Flipkart, Myntra.
So return to us would be Flipkart, probably Fresh Desk, then Myntra. I don't know about Power to SME, too early to tell. Mu Sigma we've already sold.
BookMyShow?
BookMyShow is right up there in the top 3.
Right, top 3.
Yeah.
What do you think?
And that's because in Myntra, our holding has actually come down significantly. Because we were in Erasmic, and then a lot of other investors came in. And because of the change in business model, we had to raise more money than we needed. So we diluted a lot more.
Sure. What is the largest homegrown competition for Flipkart? Name it.
Snapdeal, probably.
Snapdeal.
Yeah.
How many times Accel is right now into Flipkart?
How many times? I would want to make 1,000 times.
How many times are you currently?
That I can't tell you.
Give us like an indication.
It's actually
300
not.
times.
Huh?
300 times?
It's a little less than that.
Above 250?
Yeah. I think I've given you an indicator.
Okay. Name 2 anti-portfolio companies, Accel Partners. Like companies out of India which you think...
InMobi.
InMobi. You regret not investing in InMobi?
We didn't even come to know of it. I think we were too early when it happened. We should have probably hustled more. We didn't try to find out enough. Like I said, we were still entrepreneurs when InMobi happened. We were still kind of starting to be the Erasmic fund. So maybe we missed it because of that. That's definitely one. Maybe Snapdeal, where we wanted to make the investment, but Kunal decided to go with somebody else.
I think my last question to you, given your experience, how do you necessarily think that the startup ecosystem has changed in India? If you were to sort of give a perspective that, what startups should really focus on now, vis-a-vis like 10 years back, what would your advice be?
Yeah, and we kind of debate this all the time. I think it is very important for us to understand that there are all kinds of startups, right? So even in this room, I don't know, I heard a few 2-3 minute discussions before this. But I think where we are sort of gravitating towards are these product companies coming out of India. So we have had phenomenal success on the services opportunities, and in some ways Mu Sigma and iYogi and bunch of others are still great examples of services companies. But I would suspect that a lot of the people sitting here want to build product companies. Now, I would, every time I want to be an entrepreneur, just remember that whether you return 2x, and this is for you, your time and the investors' money, you may or may not have investors. Zoho proved to us that you can go the long distance without having an investor at all. So you should sit and think that building a company for 2x probably takes as much time and effort as it takes to build 1000x. Obviously, you need more management, you need more bandwidth, you need more money. But once you prove that you are beyond the 10-20x and there is still headroom, other things will follow. And InMobi, Flipkart, Mu Sigma are all examples of that. At every stage, we thought that there is headroom enough that we should go raise more money and kind of do the next thing, right? So be patient in analyzing what you're getting into, and because the opportunities are truly global today. I don't see why a SaaS company from here cannot eat the lunch of somebody sitting in Silicon Valley, and they should. In fact, the reason they should is our cost base is still like a fifth to sixth, and we can provide a lot more options on a SaaS model to most of these guys sitting in the US than they can, because their cost structures are so high, right? So I would urge you, all of you who want to build new companies, that go look at what is the potential. Is there a headroom issue with some of these startups, right? You don't have to build a company which has to do something with the state of Karnataka, right? Internet is not because of that, right? So it is our thought process that limits us to think that, okay, I know this problem, I know how to drink water, maybe I should go drink a Coke, right? But is that the best utilization of your time?
That was very insightful. No, I really can't resist the temptation for asking you, what is Flipkart's current valuation now?
I'm sure everybody in the room knows it, right? No, sorry, this one I can't tell you.
Okay, then that was Subrata Mitra. Can we have a round of applause for him? I think being so candid and sharing insights with us.